I don't want for you to get the wrong impression about what my intentions with your son are. So let me start here. Page 143. The Senate continued to foster the institution of slavery in the Republic. An amendment to the Act for the Apprehension and Return of Runaway Slaves, which increased the bounties to be paid to slave catchers, was signed on January 27, 1844. Another bill received from the House would have prevented slaves from carrying firearms. It was amended by Patillo, chairman of the Select Committee to which the bill was referred, to also include a prohibition on slave ownership of dogs, horses, and hogs. The amended measure passed the Senate on January 26th, but the House refused to concur with the amendments to the bill. A conference committee that included Kaufman, Patillo, and Isaac Parker failed to reach a settlement with the House as the Senate remained insistent on its changes, and the session expired without a resolution. Page 217. The problem of their spiritual needs having found an ad hoc solution, the Fourth Senate took up again the already noticed theme of improved housing for government. Together with plans for a grand new capital, it passed a bill that pointed out that many of the counties of the state are in debt and in want of courthouses, jails, jury fund, etc., and provided for the relief by appropriating 9/10 of the state tax to them for 2 years, a relatively small sum, although enough to build mortgages on. State taxes were Texas's only source of self-produced revenue now that the federal government, under the Compromise of 1850, had taken over the collection of the customs duties and partial payment of certain state debts that were formerly its principal income. The Senate could not appropriate the remaining 1/10 because the Constitution required that it be dedicated to education. That's 10% to education. Before any building could take place, however, the money had to be secured. To that end, a Senate bill was passed on December 17th authorizing the Comptroller of Public Accounts, encouraged by the receipt of $1,000 for expenses, to proceed to Washington and there take delivery of $5 million with interest in bonds from the U.S. Treasury. This was done, and the Senate passed and the House approved a bill setting $1 million of the bonds for sale. The other $5 million due under the agreement was to be held in the Treasury until the creditors of Republic and State were satisfied and gave a release, an arrangement that, although properly ratified before, was already giving rise to ominous murmurings about impugning the honor of Texas. Establishing the amount of public debt and the validity of claims were subjects of bills in this and subsequent legislatures, while friction continued over the money in escrow. What particularly irritated the Texans was the thought that the federal government would eventually decide who got what. They were also embarrassed by having the payments made by officials in the U.S. Treasury who were beyond their control, rather than those of the state. Here's the problem. It agreed to be a fucking slave state. It even had 2 attorneys general that left their post in the state of Texas, which says something about Texas's understanding of its Republican sovereignty, to go fight in the Civil War. What does this say? Maybe I wasn't supposed to find it, or maybe I just wasn't supposed to know how to read, right? It's bad enough. It's bad enough you took my July 4th argument for what would have been a Second and 13th Amendment argument and did what with it? Did you make firearms? And because I'm a slave, I'm not allowed to own one myself? Well, I know. Capacity to engage a contract, right? You know, that whole mental illness and all. I mean, there's no records for it. Where'd the bond go? Right? Did you even want to do one of those 2-year fixes? And the whole problem was you blew it on the 2 year fix and you only got a short amount of time because this is still under federal jurisdiction. Our Debt and Spacey Payments, May 27, 1865. The second series of the 730 loan has been exhausted. In other words, the people of the United States have subscribed in 45 days, including Sundays and holidays, $300 million in support of their government. History may be ransacked in vain for a parallel. England stood aghast with amazement when the French nation, stirred by the appliances of imperial menace and bureaucratic intrigue, offered the emperor $750 million francs or $150 million for the war in Italy. A bagatelle of $150 million has been lent our government half a score of times since our war began, and now we are tendering $30 million a day. 4 descriptions of United States bonds besides old 5 and 6%. Bonds, interest-bearing legal tender, treasury notes, and certificates of indebtedness are now in market. First, 6s of 1881. These are long bonds, running for 20 years from 1861 and bearing interest at the rate of 6% per annum. They were issued at the beginning of the war, and many of them were sold at 9 at 94, gold bearing then at par. They are now worth 110, or excluding interest, say 106 and a quarter. Most of these bonds are held in Europe. The whole issue is $282,561,000. Second, 520 bonds. Of these bonds, there are 2 descriptions known as old and new bonds. The old bonds are dated in 1862 and mature in 1867 to 82. The new bonds are dated in 1863 and mature in 1868 to 83. Of the former, 510,545,000 are in existence. Of the latter, $86 million. Both are redeemable at the pleasure of the United States at maturity, but payment cannot be demanded until 20 years have elapsed from the date of the bond. Both bear interest at the rate of 6% per annum, payable semi-annually in gold. Of the old 520s, a large proportion are held in Europe. When gold rose here to 250 and above, the 520 bonds, which were offered to purchasers at par in legal tender currency, could be laid down in Europe at 35 at 40 cents on the dollar. Our English friends, who took the rebel cotton loan, now offered at 13%, at or near par in gold, would not touch 520s. The shrewd merchants of Amsterdam, the wisest financiers and the richest in the world, eschewed cotton rebel loans and subscribed for $150 million of 520s. Germany followed the example and took from $100 million to $150 million more. Amsterdam can now sell its bonds at a profit of nearly 100% on the original investment. London cannot realize on its cotton bonds even at a loss of 85%. People here who subscribed for 520s at par when gold was 200% have at present prices made 50% in gold on their investment, no mean profit, to say nothing of the interest in gold, which has at times amounted to 15% in currency. Third, 1040 bonds. These bonds, of which $172,770,000 are in existence, are so called because they are redeemable at the expiration of 10 years and payable 40 years from date. They bear interest at the rate of 5%, payable semi-annually in gold. These bonds were issued at the solicitation of friends of the government, who urged that 5% was enough to pay for money. Agents of European bankers likewise suggested that foreigners would be more likely to place confidence in a 5% bond than in one bearing a higher rate of interest. Neither in this country nor in Europe, however, have the 5% bonds become favorites. The original issue was disposed of with difficulty, and very few of the bonds have been placed in Europe. Fourth, 730 notes. These securities are so called because they bear interest at the rate of 7.3% per annum, payable in currency. At the expiration of 3 years from their date, they are either payable or fundable into new 520 bonds at the wish of the holder. Of these notes, few, if any, have gone abroad, and yet in a few months 600 millions of them have been disposed of at par to the people of the United States. The second series, as we stated, has been taken up in the just 45 days. It is now announced that the third and last series, authorized consisting of $230 million, is offered to the public on the same terms as the two previous ones. And it says here, our national debt is now pretty safe to estimate it 3,000 millions of dollars. There are those who believe that claims for damages and the military and other expenses of government, which must remain large for many years to come, will so far exceed the revenue from customs and taxes as to render further loans indispensable. But it seems unlikely that this will be the case, at all events to say any extent, ... Why? I've understood that I am not alone in having a theory that a great deal of the Texas gas and oil sector is a crock of shit. That they've claimed the mineral rights of other people and they harvest them for their tangible and intangible property, including through the alleged medical sector. And so periodically they have to import people from outside of the state of Texas and rob them through some ritual of debauchery. Because nobody wanted to be honest about the fact that after they agreed to be a slave state and joined with slavers in the Civil War, they lost. And so rather than the land-owning and property-owning families and entities in Texas taking responsibility, well, they just came up with a way to bond the people, including through the education system. And they've been running this for the last 170 years. The legislators were not, however, totally unsympathetic to the pleas for reform in a bill introduced by Senator Upshaw. The compensation for county convicts hired out for labor was doubled to 50 cents a day. Their contracts were restricted to work on public roads and streets or on the county farm, and the length of individual contracts was restricted to 1 year, half the previous permissible length. This measure, proposed in response to allegations of unfair practices with regard to the use of county convicts, passed the Senate unanimously, received only 2 votes in opposition in the House, and was signed by Governor Ross on March 7, 1889. With a surplus in the state treasury, the 21st legislature was not pressed to find a way to supplement revenues. It did, however, endorse several bond issues for specific purposes. A 40-year bond issue initiated on August 5, 1870, had contained a provision that made the 7% bonds redeemable at the pleasure of the state after 20 years. You know what this tells me? Every 20 years and every 40 years, you just flip the same fucking hustle. Isn't it? You see, your own governor, Texas, said that it was prudent to reconsider certain decisions, including in regards to the desire for annexation, after there had been a demonstration of bad faith by the United States Treasury in taking on certain relationships financially with Texas when it came to bonds, and then once it acquired those bonds, to renegotiate the terms and say that the entire class had to agree to relinquish liability in order to get paid out. But all that did was further entrench you into an economy where you just take the short sell and keep trying to pass on the fact that you overextended your capacity based upon what you actually produced yourself. And you just kept leveraging that you would be able to lean on somebody else as your fucking property to cover your losses. And you've been doing that ever since 1850. What makes you think that anybody else in the fucking world has to keep this charade up with you? You never ended slavery. You never fucking ended slavery. The problem is if the information in this is correct, it says it comes from a period publication that was highly reputed, and that it was made from an original leaf from the original printing on May 27, 1865. I don't have access to primary source documents because you shut off the fucking libraries. You took what was our wealth. You took what was ours, and you did what with it? Because you know elsewhere in here it says what those bonds were for. The next two paragraphs. As the whole sell was, it was supposed to be for public goods, things like roads, but what ended up happening? Well, you just put it into a contract, you bonded the fucking contract, and you gave it to your fucking friends, and you've been doing that for 120 fucking years. It's done. I don't know who in the United States of America or who internationally agreed to co-conspire to let you charlatans do this. It's done. Happy fucking 4th of July. Your goddamn fucking Confederate slaver bond scam is canceled. I'm sorry. If that means the Ku Klux fucking Klan was prevented, then holla fucking Luya already.